The business card hid between the pages of a used psychology book Amara had bought from a street vendor near Union Square. The book was worn, its corners curled, pages underlined by someone else's hand, but inside it she had tucked something that didn't belong. Malik Carter, CEO, Carter Group. She told herself she had no business keeping it. She told herself she should throw it away. Yet she carried the book everywhere, on the subway, pressed between strangers, in the back room at the cafe, even to bed. The card wasn't heavy, but it bent her thoughts every time she felt its outline through the thin paper. "Baby, you've been sighing at them socks so long I'm thinking they gonna fold themselves," Nana Pearl said, peeling potatoes at the tiny kitchen table in their Queens apartment. Her tone was dry, but her eyes knew too much. Amara glanced up. "It's nothing, Nana. Just work." Nana arched her brow, that look she had perfected raising 3 children and a granddaughter with no man to lean on. Thought so. Work don't make a girl's face turn the color of a candle flame. This got the sound of a man you ain't ready to name. Amara shook her head quickly. "There's no man." "Oh, there's a man," Nana said, returning to her peeling as if it were settled law. "And he ain't from around our way. That's why you're floating. Baby, the world outside looks at us like postcards. Pretty to glance at, but not to stay in. Don't think a good man erases class. Don't think a ring erases power. Don't let hope buy heartbreak it can't afford." The words landed with their usual weight, soft and sharp all at once. Amara folded the laundry, pressing the shirts flat as if discipline might keep her mind steady. She thought about Langston Cafe on Lenox Avenue, about its polished wood counters, the brass lamps shining in the morning, the scent of cinnamon and roasted beans that seemed to promise success to everyone who stepped inside. She thought about Malik Carter, who came there for meetings but managed to make her feel like the only one in the room when he spoke. She told herself he was only polite, but the way he looked at her, direct, gentle, unhurried, felt like something else. She remembered that time when, after one of his meetings, he lingered by the pastry case and asked in a quiet voice, "Do you ever feel like everybody else got the right map and you're just guessing?" He had said it like a confession, not small talk. She hadn't answered. She hadn't known how, but she had felt it in her bones. By the time she arrived at the cafe, the place was buzzing. Mr. Whitaker, their manager, tugged at his tie as if it were choking him. "Heads up, people. Big meeting today. Important clients. Amara, you're on their table." Perfect posture. Polite greetings. "And please, no spills." He pushed his glasses up nervously. "Got it," she said, tying her apron. She prepared the settings with deliberate precision. Polished glasses, folded napkins, spoons aligned like soldiers. She told herself she would focus on the job and nothing else. The cafe door opened with a soft chime and the air shifted. Malik Carter walked in with 2 executives at his side. His gray suit sharpened his broad shoulders. His leather briefcase looked like it cost more than a month of tips, and he carried himself like a man used to rooms bending around him. But when his eyes found Amara, something softened in his expression. It wasn't the look of a man checking out a girl. It was more like recognition, relief even, as if she were a familiar landmark on a long road. "Amara," he said warmly. "What a pleasant surprise." The 2 men with him looked her over with detached curiosity, already sizing her up as if she were part of the decor. She held her posture straight and set down their menus. "Good morning, gentlemen." "Coffee to start?" One asked for black, another just water. Malik requested a latte, his smile lingering when she wrote it down. She returned with drinks that didn't rattle on the saucers. He gave her that small, grateful look again, the kind that made her heart stumble, then turned back to business. The conversation at the table was low but intense. Words like investors, returns, deadline carried more weight than volume. Amara worked around them like part of the rhythm, refilling a glass right before it emptied, straightening cutlery knocked askew, collecting empty plates without breaking the current of negotiation. She pretended not to hear when one of them muttered, "We have to close the deal today. The investors are getting impatient," she pretended. But her pulse quickened anyway. On her short break, she stepped into the alley with a paper cup of leftover brew and snapped a picture of the hydrangeas blooming outside the florist next door. She sent it to Nana. "Look what's blooming on Lenox." The reply came quick, 3 heart emojis, then a 4th message. "Bloom careful, baby." When she returned, the cafe had a new presence. A man stood near the entrance, tall and commanding, surveying the room like he owned it. He had Malik's jawline and eyes, but none of his warmth. Where Malik's presence drew people in, this man's pressed them down. He crossed the floor with quiet authority and stopped in front of her. "You must be Amara Johnson," he said. "I'm Andre Carter, Malik's brother." The resemblance made the air taut. Amara met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Mr. Carter, how can I help you? Is there somewhere private we can talk?" His voice was smooth, but it was not a request. She glanced at Mr. Whitaker, who hovered uneasily by the counter, then nodded toward the small back room. It held only 2 chairs, a table, and walls too thin to keep out the café hum. Andre sat with effortless dominance, crossing one leg over the other like a man already in control. "So," he said, eyes narrowing, "you're the reason my brother's been distracted." "I don't know what you mean by distracted," she replied evenly, folding her hands in her lap. "Malik is a romantic," Andre said. "Always has been. But business is cruel. The families who hold our majority stake are traditional. They'll tolerate many things, but not a CEO charmed by a 19-year-old waitress from Queens." She kept her breath calm, though his words pressed like weight on her chest. "And what exactly does that have to do with me?" "Everything," he answered. "Perception, alliances, investor confidence. You are a complication my brother can't afford." He reached into his suit jacket and placed an envelope on the table with surgical precision. "This is a path that keeps everyone whole." Amara stared at it. "You think I'm for sale? I think you're smart enough to understand how the world works." He rose, adjusted his jacket, and left her with the envelope lying between them like a trap. She sat there for a long moment, the cafe's hum bleeding through the door, milk steaming, bells jingling. Then she stood, left the envelope untouched on the table, and walked back into the life she actually owned. At the far end, Malik still sat with his partners, discussing numbers, while the latte she had made left a pale crescent on the saucer. He looked up, his eyes asking silently if she was all right. She didn't nod, didn't smile. She refilled water at another table, thanked a couple for their patience, reset salt and pepper shakers with steady hands. Nana's words came back, "Bloom careful." Amara decided careful didn't mean small. She slipped the psychology book back into the service shelf, Malik's card hidden inside, and returned to work with her head high. That night, Amara returned home to the familiar hum of the Queen's apartment. The lamp on the kitchen counter glowed dim, casting soft light across the linoleum. Nana Pearl sat with her Bible open but her eyes sharp, watching Amara as she slipped out of her coat. "You've been quiet all evening," Nana said, her voice steady as the tick of the clock. "Quiet can mean tired. Quiet can also mean troubled. Which one is it?" Amara busied herself with pouring water into a chipped glass. "It's nothing, Nana, just a long shift." Nana closed the Bible with a soft thud. "You don't get long shifts in your spirit unless there's a man behind it. And if I'm right, baby, he's not from a world that makes room for you." Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, to ask for advice, but the words sat heavy. She excused herself, saying she had studying to do, and slipped into her small room. The walls carried posters of poets and faded family photos. On her desk sat the psychology book with Malik's card inside. She touched the edge of the card without pulling it out, then pushed it back under her notebook as if hiding the temptation would hide the feeling too. The next morning, Langston Café thrummed with the weekday rush. Executives in tailored suits leaned over laptops, artists tapped at tablets, and locals filled the corner seats with conversations over cappuccinos. Amara tied her apron, hair pulled neatly back, ready to work. At 10 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. The door opened and in walked Malik Carter, once again flanked by his team. Their presence drew eyes like gravity. Men with power could make a room rearrange itself. Mr. Whitaker hurried forward, smoothing his tie. "Mr. Carter, welcome back." "Right this way." Malik gave a polite nod, but when his gaze found Amara, it lingered. He didn't smile in the obvious way. Instead, there was that quiet warmth again, as though he recognized something in her that steadied him. Amara approached with practiced calm. "Good morning, gentlemen. Can I start you off with anything?" "Espresso," one said curtly. "Tea," said another. Malik spoke last. "Coffee, black. Thank you, Amara." His voice carried familiarity, a subtle acknowledgement that unsettled the polished air between them. She returned with their drinks and moved to other tables, But she could feel his gaze finding her in small moments. It wasn't invasive. It was like someone checking the horizon for a landmark. The meeting stretched on. Amara delivered plates of pastries and adjusted silverware while numbers floated across the table like a language of war. Contracts, projections, deadlines, investors. She caught fragments but kept her focus. In her world, the right tilt of a glass and the right word of courtesy mattered more than mergers. At the corner of the café, two women whispered, eyes fixed on Malik. They nudged each other, giggling over his presence, speculating who he was. Amara heard enough to know she wasn't invisible, not tonight, not with Malik in the room. She set her tray down firmly and reminded herself that this was just work. When she passed the table again, Malik leaned slightly toward her, his voice dropping low. "Busy morning?" "Always is," she replied softly, keeping her eyes on the plates. For a moment, silence pressed between them. Then Malik asked, just audible, "Do you have a break after your shift?" Her hands hesitated, then steadied. "Why?" "Because I'd like to talk to you. Outside of all this." He gestured faintly to the suits, the laptops, the heavy air of money. She froze, hearing Nana's warning echo in her chest. This was the kind of step you didn't take lightly. Before she could answer, Mr. Whitaker appeared at her side. "Amara, could you help me with the back inventory when you're done here?" His tone wasn't casual, it was protective. "Yes, sir," she said quickly, and stepped back from the table. Later that afternoon, Malik lingered after the meeting, deliberately slow to pack his briefcase. As Amara wiped down nearby tables, he rose and approached, careful not to draw attention. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot earlier," he said. "I just thought maybe you'd join me for dinner, somewhere quiet. No pressure." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Why me?" He considered, then answered simply, "Because when you speak it sounds honest, and I don't get much honesty." Her breath caught. The room around them still bustled, but for a second it felt distant. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing, only nodded faintly. Malik smiled, not triumphant but grateful, and left with his men. That evening, Amara returned home, her head filled with questions she couldn't push away. Nana Pearl was knitting in her chair, gospel humming low from the radio. "Something stirring in you," Nana said without looking up. "I can feel it. You better remember, baby. Rich men can offer you the moon, but the moon can't fit in your pocket." Amara sat at the kitchen table, resting her chin in her hands. She didn't mention Malik, didn't say his name, but she thought of his eyes, of his words. "I don't get much honesty." Up in her room, she opened the psychology book again. The cream-colored card slipped out, landing on her lap. She held it a long moment before tucking it back, as if the act of hiding it could hold back the tide of change pressing against her small, careful world. 2 days later, as Amara left her evening class at Queens College, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't know. She almost ignored it, but something made her swipe and answer. "Amara?" The voice was unmistakable, deep, calm, carrying a trace of hesitation. She froze. "Mr. Carter," she said before catching herself. "Malik," he corrected gently. "I know this is sudden, but would you have dinner with me tonight? Nothing extravagant, just food and conversation. If not, I'll understand." Her chest tightened. Nana's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't let hope buy heartbreak it can't afford," but the word "where" slipped from her lips before doubt could silence her. They met at a diner in the East Village, the kind of place with worn checkered floors, neon lights that buzzed overhead, and booths sagging from years of late-night conversations. It was the opposite of the sleek, guarded places Amara imagined he frequented. Yet when she arrived, Malik stood as though greeting a queen, pulling out her seat with quiet respect. "I thought here would be better," he said. "Somewhere we can actually talk." She tilted her head, amused. "This doesn't seem like your usual spot." "You'd be surprised," he replied. "I grew up in Brooklyn. Diners like this fed me half my childhood." The waitress handed them menus, but Malik didn't glance at his. "Cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke," he ordered with ease. Amara smiled and asked for the same. When the food came, he reached for a fry with almost boyish delight. "Best food in the city," he declared. "Michelin stars can't compare." Amara laughed. "You don't look like someone who eats greasy fries." He met her gaze directly. "I'm a lot of things people don't expect." The conversation started light. School, shifts, favorite books. But soon it deepened. Malik asked about her dreams, and she told him about studying psychology, about wanting to become a counselor because listening to people mattered to her. People carry so much they never put down, she said. Sometimes I think if someone really heard them, it could change everything. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's rare. Most people want to be heard, not to listen. She grew bold enough to ask, and you? What do you want? He hesitated, then said quietly, peace. To not feel like every move I make is calculated or judged. To sit across from someone who doesn't need anything from me but the truth. The honesty in his voice startled her. Without thinking, she reached across, dipped one of his fries into the ketchup, and popped it in her mouth. His eyes widened in surprise before he broke into a laugh, unguarded and warm. The kind of laugh that made the noisy diner feel smaller and safer. By the time the plates were empty, the diner had thinned to a few late-night regulars. Malik leaned back, studying her with quiet gratitude instead of conquest. Thank you for coming, he said. You're welcome, she answered softly, her pulse unsteady. Outside, the night air was cool, the city humming with headlights and voices. He walked her to the subway, keeping a careful, respectful distance. At the steps beneath the yellow glow of a street lamp, he stopped. I don't want to rush anything, he said, his tone deliberate, but I hope this isn't the last time. Amara thought of Nana's warnings, of Mr. Whitaker's protective eyes, of Andre Carter's envelope. But then she looked at Malik and saw a man who seemed to notice only her in a world full of noise. Maybe, she said, allowing the possibility. His smile carried relief, not triumph. Good night, Amara. Good night, Malik. She descended into the subway, the rumble of the train rising to meet her, the psychology book still holding his card back home, and now a new weight pressing into her chest, hope disguised as possibility. The week that followed felt like stolen time. Amara moved through her classes and cafe shifts with the quiet glow of someone carrying a secret, though she tried hard not to show it. When she smiled without realizing, Nana Pearl noticed immediately. That's the kind of smile that don't come from textbooks or tips, she warned, folding laundry at the kitchen table. Amara deflected, but the words clung like burrs. Nana's instincts had always been sharper than knives. At the cafe, Mr. Whitaker's protective eye grew sharper too. He noticed the way Malik sometimes lingered near the counter a few extra moments before leaving. Noticed how Amara's hands trembled slightly when she poured his coffee. And one afternoon he pulled her aside in the back. Listen, he said firmly. I've seen men like him before, powerful, charming, carrying storms behind their smiles. They don't play fair, Amara. You're young. You've got plans. Don't get caught in somebody else's game. Amara promised she understood, though the promise felt hollow even to her. Despite warnings, Malik kept finding ways to reach her. He would stop in at odd hours just for a coffee he didn't need, leaving behind napkins with quick scribbles, poems, little lines of thought, fragments of honesty he couldn't say aloud. Amara kept them folded in her apron pocket, reading them in the quiet moments before bed. The words weren't grand gestures. They were small, human, raw, and they pressed against her resolve like waves against stone. One evening after closing, as the last customer left and the cafe dimmed to its nightlights, Amara walked out to find Malik waiting across the street, leaning against a black car but dressed down, no suit, just a sweater and dark jeans that made him look less like a CEO and more like the man who had grown up in Brooklyn diners. He smiled gently and fell into step beside her without asking. They walked a few blocks in silence until they reached the corner of 138th Street, where the glow of a church's stained glass spilled onto the sidewalk. He stopped there, his breath visible in the cool night air. I don't want to hide, he said suddenly. I don't want to make you feel like you're some secret I'm ashamed of. But I need you to know being close to me comes with shadows. My brother, the board, the investors, they'll all see you as leverage. They'll use you to reach me, and I don't want that for you. Amara's heart pounded. She thought of Andre's envelope, of the look in his eyes that told her she was nothing more than a problem to be bought away. She thought of Nana's warnings and Mr. Whitaker's fear. But she also thought of Malik standing here, stripped of power plays, asking her to believe him. Then what are you saying? She asked. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. I'm saying I care about you. I'm saying I don't care about rules written by men who only see the world in terms of money and power. I want this. I want us. For the first time, his hand brushed hers, tentative, not claiming, but asking. Amara's chest tightened with the weight of choice. Everything in her life until now had been built on caution, on Nana's careful instructions, on playing it safe in a city that swallowed the reckless whole. Yet here was a man who, despite everything he had, looked at her like she was the one thing that mattered. Slowly, she let her fingers rest against his. That was when the first kiss happened, beneath the shadow of the old church, the city still alive around them, but, in that moment, irrelevant. It wasn't hurried or desperate. It was patient, like two people stepping carefully into a new language. When he pulled back, Malik's forehead rested lightly against hers. "I don't know what's coming," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to lose this before it even begins." Amara's throat tightened, but she found her voice. "Neither do I." The sound of a passing bus broke the spell, and they stepped apart, but something had shifted between them. The red line had been crossed. What had been glances and notes and conversations in diners had become something undeniable. Something neither of them could pretend away anymore. That night, lying in her small bed with the psychology book on her desk and Malik's card still tucked inside, Amara understood for the first time that she wasn't just carrying a secret anymore. She was carrying a choice that could change the course of her life. The next days felt different. Amara moved through her shifts with a secret warmth, her steps lighter, her smile harder to suppress. The kiss outside the church replayed in her mind whenever she allowed herself the luxury to drift. And even though she tried to act normal, Nana Pearl's eyes never missed a thing. One evening, as Amara folded towels, Nana paused in her knitting and said, "You've been walking around like springtime in December. Don't forget, child. Flowers bloom fast, but frost is always waiting." Amara said nothing, but her heart knew her grandmother's warning was not born of bitterness but of experience. At Langston Café, Mr. Whitaker grew sharper in his watchfulness. He noticed the way Malik's car sometimes idled across the street, how Amara's expression softened when she saw him enter. And finally, he spoke one night while she wiped down the counter. "Amara, you've got something rare, and you can't afford to gamble it on someone who lives in a world built on contracts and enemies. I've seen men like him, and no matter how kind they seem, their world doesn't forgive mistakes. Protect yourself before you get pulled too far in." She assured him she understood, but the truth was she was already too deep to step back. Malik's gestures remained subtle but constant. A note folded into a napkin, a book left for her at the counter, conversations stolen in the quiet corners of the cafe after meetings. Each word and glance wove a thread tighter between them, and soon what had been tentative became something Amara couldn't imagine untangling. He never made her feel like a distraction. Instead, he spoke as though she grounded him, as if she was the one place where he could rest from the weight of expectations. One evening he asked her to meet him after work. They walked together through Harlem streets until they reached Abyssinian Baptist Church, its historic walls glowing against the night sky. Malik stopped in front of it, the echoes of their first kiss still alive there, and took her hands. "I don't want to hide you," he said. "But the truth is my brother is watching. The board is restless, and the people around me will try to make you feel small so they can control me. I can fight them, but I need you to know what comes with this." Amara looked at him steadily. "Then fight. But don't ask me to live in fear of them." He kissed her again, stronger this time, the kind of kiss that made the noise of the city vanish, and for a moment she believed nothing could touch them. Yet even as his arms held her, Amara sensed the storm building on the horizon. Andre Carter's warning still lingered in her mind, and she knew powerful men did not issue threats idly. The world around Malik was one of leverage and manipulation, and in that world she was already marked as a weakness. When she finally slipped into bed that night, Nana asleep in the next room, Amara lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling. Her lips still tingled from Malik's kiss. Her chest still carried his words, but deep down she felt the weight of what was coming. Love had found her, but so had danger. And for the first time she wondered whether her heart was strong enough to withstand both. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the weight of Malik's world finally landed in Amara's hands. The cafe was quieter than usual, the lunch rush gone, and she was restocking sugar jars when the door opened. She looked up expecting a customer, but froze when Andre Carter walked in, his presence as sharp and deliberate as the tailored suit on his frame. He didn't look around or wait for a host. His eyes found her instantly, and the air in the room seemed to tighten. "Miss Johnson," he said smoothly, his voice carrying authority rather than warmth. "We should talk." Amara glanced at Mr. Whitaker for guidance, but Andre's gaze made clear this was not a request. She led him toward the small back room, the same one where he had first confronted her and shut the door. He sat down with the posture of a man who expected obedience, and without preamble he placed a thick white envelope on the table. "This," he said, "is $20,000. More than enough to cover your college tuition, your living expenses, even a cushion to make life easier. All you need to do is walk away from my brother. He doesn't need distractions, especially from someone who has no place in his world. Take the money, disappear quietly, and everyone wins." Amara's chest burned with anger. "You think I can be bought off like some inconvenience?" Andre leaned forward, his eyes cold. "I think you're smart enough to recognize opportunity when it's handed to you. You're 19, working 2 jobs, living in Queens with your grandmother. My brother may have convinced himself he's in love, but the truth is he's standing on the edge of the biggest merger of his career. And you are nothing but leverage for men who would destroy him without hesitation. If you care about him at all, you'll walk away. If you care about yourself, you'll do it with this envelope in your hand." She wanted to throw it at his face, to walk out without touching it, but something inside her stopped her. The money could pay for tuition. It could ease Nana's worries. It could buy her choices she never thought she'd have. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of thinking she'd been bought. Yet she also knew the future she dreamed of required more than stubborn pride. With trembling fingers, she picked up the envelope, not as surrender but as survival. Before she could speak, Mr. Whitaker appeared in the doorway. His eyes flicked to the envelope, then to Andre, and something hardened in his expression. "Miss Johnson, we need you up front," he said firmly. When Amara rose, Andre smirked as though he'd already won. That evening, as she left the cafe, a message arrived on her phone instructing her to meet Malik at Mount Sinai Hospital. Confused, she made her way there, the envelope heavy in her bag. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit her as soon as she stepped through the doors, and in the waiting area she saw not Malik but Andre again, standing beside a striking woman with poised features and diamond earrings, Celeste Langston, the daughter of one of Malik's most powerful board allies. Next to her stood her father, Earl Langston, the kind of man who carried authority in every wordless glance. Celeste spoke first, her tone polished like glass. "Amara, you're young, and I'm sure you think this is something real. But Malik and I are engaged. Our families have planned this for years, and his responsibilities go far beyond what you can imagine. You can't give him the future he needs, but I can. Do yourself a favor and let go." Amara's heart pounded so loud she barely heard Earl's deep, commanding voice. "My dear, this is business as much as life. Malik's position requires stability, not scandal. Walking away now is the only dignified choice for you." She turned in desperation, and finally Malik appeared down the hall, his face tense, his steps measured. "Amara," he said, reaching toward her, but Celeste's hand clamped on his arm and Earl's stare bore down like stone. For one breath he hesitated. That hesitation shattered something in her. Tears stung her eyes, not from weakness but from clarity. She realized in that instant that she had been a pawn in their world. And even Malik, kind, broken, yearning Malik, wasn't free from its chains. She pulled the envelope from her bag and held it up. "You know what? I'll take this, not because of you," she said, her voice cutting through the cold air, "but because I'll make sure my future isn't chained to anyone's pity or permission. You can all have your mergers, your alliances, your polished lies. I'll fight for myself." Malik's face twisted with regret, but Amara didn't wait for him to speak. She turned and walked out of the hospital, the envelope pressed to her chest like both a weapon and a shield, her heart breaking but her pride unbroken. Amara stepped out of Mount Sinai into the chill of the evening, the city lights harsh and unfriendly, her fingers clutched tight around the envelope. The voices of Celeste and Earl still echoed in her ears, polished words meant to belittle her into obedience, and behind it all lingered the image of Malik standing frozen. Torn between her and the empire his family demanded he protect. That single hesitation had been enough to break what her heart had only just begun to build. She walked down Madison Avenue, her vision blurred, the roar of taxis and chatter of strangers drowning beneath the sound of her own pulse. By the time she reached the train platform, she knew she could not go back. Whatever fragile hope she had held on to had been crushed the moment he allowed them to speak for him. Yet the envelope in her bag burned like fire. $20,000, enough to lift her and Nana out of scraping by, enough to pay tuition, enough to open a door to a different life. It was a cruel irony that her pain came wrapped in the very key to her independence. When she reached home, Nana Pearl was waiting in her chair, her knitting set aside, her eyes searching Amara's face. "Baby, what happened?" she asked softly. Amara dropped the envelope on the table, the thick paper heavy against the worn wood. "The cost of loving a man like him," she whispered. Nana opened it, saw the bills inside, and shook her head slowly. "Money's powerful, but it don't mend hearts. You use this for your future, not for their satisfaction. Let this buy your freedom, not your silence." The days that followed were raw. Amara forced herself into a routine: school, café, shifts at the bookstore on weekends. She worked harder, spoke less, and carried herself with an armor that kept curious eyes away. Mr. Whitaker noticed her sharper edges but didn't press. He only made sure she had extra hours when she asked, slipping her shifts without comment, a quiet show of loyalty. Malik, however, became a ghost she could not entirely avoid. Sometimes she glimpsed him across the street in a car. Sometimes she caught the whisper of his name on business conversations at Table 5. But he never approached her directly. She told herself that was for the best. One late night, as she closed the cafe, Malik finally walked in alone. He looked tired, his tailored coat failing to hide the weight he carried. "Amara," he said, his voice rough, "please just hear me out." But she didn't let him finish. She held up her hand, stopping him with a firmness that surprised them both. "You had your chance to speak, Malik, and you let them speak for you. I don't need apologies wrapped in excuses. I need a life that belongs to me. Not to the Carter Group, not to your board, not to your family. I'll take their money and I'll turn it into a future, but I won't trade myself for it." The words struck him visibly, and for the first time she saw a man unshielded, stripped of the composure he wore like armor. But she walked past him, locked the cafe door, and left him standing in the glow of the street lamp, his shadow stretching long against the glass. That night, lying awake beside the steady breath of Nana asleep in the next room, Amara stared at the ceiling and told herself she had chosen strength. The ache in her chest insisted otherwise, but she clung to the thought like a lifeline. She had given up the dream of Malik because she refused to let herself be reduced to a bargaining chip in someone else's empire. She would fight for herself now, no matter how much it hurt. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of Amara's life hardened into something sharp and steady. She worked double shifts between Langston Cafe and the bookstore, attended classes with determination, and forced herself not to flinch whenever she overheard whispers about Malik Carter's company or caught a glimpse of him in a newspaper headline. She kept the envelope hidden in a drawer, using the money carefully to pay tuition installments and cover bills. Nana Pearl noticed her granddaughter's sleepless eyes and worn frame but never pushed. She simply brewed tea each night and left it on the bedside table without comment. One evening, as Amara was leaving the cafe, a familiar figure approached. It was Mr. Jacobs, Malik's longtime assistant, a man who had always treated her with quiet respect. His expression was tense but kind. "Miss Johnson," he said gently, "I thought you should know." Malik ended the engagement with Celeste Langston. He dismissed Andre from the company as well. It caused no small amount of trouble, but he wouldn't bend on those decisions. Amara stood frozen, unsure whether to feel satisfaction or sorrow. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Jacobs handed her a thick envelope, this one different from the first, handwritten with her name carefully written on the front. "Because he asked me to deliver this. He said if you never read it, he would understand, but if you did, at least you would know the truth." Back home, Amara sat at her desk with the psychology book open beside her, Malik's original business card still tucked between its pages. She opened the envelope slowly, pulling out several sheets of paper covered in Malik's careful script. "Amara, I failed you when I let others speak in my place. I failed you when I let hesitation break something real. I was raised to think in terms of alliances and appearances, to measure every decision by the weight of profit. But with you, I saw something that made all of that feel hollow. I told you once that I wanted peace, and I realize now that peace only exists where honesty lives. You were my honesty, and I let it slip through my fingers. I cannot undo the damage, but I can choose differently now. Andre no longer represents Carter Group, and the merger tied to your humiliation has been dissolved. Celeste is no longer in my life. I'm alone in this fight, but at least I can say it's my choice. There is a house on the Hudson River. quiet and away from the noise. It belonged to my mother and I want you to have it. Inside the envelope is the deed. Whether you ever forgive me or not, whether you use the house or burn it, I want you to know that you are not powerless. You are not leverage. You are not something to be bought. You are the only person who has ever looked at me and seen a man instead of a title. That will never leave me. Malik. Amara sat with the letter trembling in her hands, the deed tucked between the pages like a promise she didn't know how to accept. The house represented more than property. It represented an escape, a chance at the quiet she had always longed for, yet it also bound her to the memory of him. Tears blurred her vision, and for the first time since walking out of the hospital, she allowed herself to cry without restraint. Later that night, Nana found her sitting at the desk, the papers spread before her. "What's all this, baby?" she asked softly. Amara wiped her face and showed her the letter. Nana read silently, then nodded slowly. A man who can admit his wrongs is rare. A man who can act on them is rarer still. But this is not about him, Amara. This is about you. What do you want? Amara looked down at the deed again. She didn't know the answer yet, but she felt something shift inside her. For the first time, the path forward wasn't about what Malik or Andre or the board wanted. It was about what she would choose for herself. Amara took the train north one Friday afternoon, the deed folded carefully in her bag, her heart pounding with the weight of uncertainty. She told Nana she needed time to think, and though her grandmother's eyes were full of worry, she only said, "Go find your peace, baby. Just don't lose yourself in the noise of somebody else's choices." The ride up the Hudson felt like leaving the city and its claws behind. The further she traveled, the more the skyline melted into green hills, wide water, and stretches of quiet that seemed like another world. The house sat near Beacon, small and weathered with white paint that had faded and shutters that creaked in the wind, but it overlooked the river in a way that stole her breath. She walked through the empty rooms, bare floors echoing under her shoes, sunlight spilling through windows like blessings. On the mantel sat a few forgotten records and a stack of old books, traces of Malik's mother lingering like whispers of another life. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt her shoulders loosen. She opened the back door and stepped onto the porch, staring out at the wide water stretching endlessly before her, the sound of the current soft but unrelenting. She spent 3 days there alone, reading, writing in her journal, cooking simple meals, and letting the silence settle over her like a balm. She thought about Malik's letter, about his claim that she was his honesty, about the choices he had made to sever ties that had bound him for years. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the café, in the diner, outside the church, always with that quiet searching as though she was the only thing steady in his world. She thought about the pain, too. The envelope from Andre, Celeste's cruel voice, his hesitation in that sterile hospital hallway. The memories clashed inside her until she realized the truth. Both were real. He had hurt her, and he had also tried to make amends. The choice now wasn't about whether Malik deserved forgiveness. It was about whether she was willing to risk her heart again. On the third night, she sat on the porch beneath a sky heavy with stars and finally made her decision. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling, and typed a message. Abyssinian Church. Tomorrow. Noon. Come alone. She pressed send before fear could stop her. The next morning, she returned to Harlem, her steps steady despite the storm inside her. She arrived at the church early and sat on the stone steps, watching the street bustle with Saturday life. Children running, vendors selling fruit, neighbors greeting each other with laughter. She realized she wanted her life to be built on something this ordinary, not on power plays and business deals. If Malik was willing to meet her here, not in a boardroom or a penthouse, but in a place rooted in history and faith, then maybe he truly meant what he had written. As the church bells struck noon, she looked up and saw him. Malik came alone, dressed simply, his face lined with exhaustion but softened with hope. He paused when he saw her, almost as though afraid to breathe, and then he walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. Amara rose to meet him, her heart pounding not with fear this time but with resolve. Malik stopped a few feet from her on the church steps, his hands open at his sides as if to show he carried no armor, no shields, nothing but himself. For a moment neither spoke. The sounds of Harlem moving around them, children's laughter in the distance, the hum of cars passing, the ringing echo of the noon bell fading into quiet. Amara felt the weight of the weeks between them, all the hurt, the anger, the sleepless nights, and the longing she had tried to bury. I came alone. he said softly. Because you asked. Because I finally understand that if I want you in my life, it has to be on your terms, not mine. She searched his face, looking for the arrogance she had once feared, but all she saw was exhaustion and truth. You let them humiliate me, she said, her voice steady. You stood there while they called me unworthy, while they made me feel like nothing, and you didn't stop them. That moment broke me, Malik. How do I trust you not to let it happen again? He stepped closer, but not too close. You're right. I failed you. I let hesitation cost me the only thing that felt real. I can't erase it, but I can tell you what's different now. I cut Andre out of the company. I ended the engagement with Celeste. I dismantled the merger that used you as leverage. I chose to stand alone in a world that thrives on alliances because I'd rather lose everything than lose the chance to show you I'm not afraid anymore. I don't want to own you, protect you like some fragile secret, or put you in anyone's shadow. I want to walk beside you. If you can't forgive me, I'll accept it. But I needed you to know I am not the same man who stood silent that day. Tears pricked at Amara's eyes. Not from weakness, but from the weight of hearing him say what she had needed all along. If we do this, Malik, it has to be equal. No secrets. No hesitation. No one else gets to define what we are. He nodded firmly. Equal. Always. For a long moment they stood in silence until finally Amara stepped forward, closing the distance, and pressed her forehead against his. Then we try again, she whispered. His breath caught, and then he kissed her. Not with urgency this time, but with reverence, a seal on a promise renewed. Life did not transform overnight, but it shifted steadily. Amara continued her studies in psychology, pouring herself into classes with the money she had safeguarded from Andre's cruel envelope. She worked fewer shifts now, balancing time between school and the quiet weekends she sometimes spent at the Hudson River Cottage, a place that had become hers in truth. Nana Pearl visited often, knitting on the porch, reminding her granddaughter that love without boundaries was no love at all. Malik sold off divisions of Carter Group, stepping away from the mergers and manipulations that had once defined him. For the first time in years, he lived not as a figurehead, but as a man. He walked Harlem streets without an entourage, visited the café not for deals, but for simple meals, and sometimes just sat in silence beside Amara while she studied, content to be ordinary. 2 years later, on a quiet evening beneath the same stained glass of Abyssinian Baptist Church, he asked her to marry him. There was no grand spectacle, no boardroom audience, just Malik holding out a simple ring and whispering, "Equal, always." She said yes. Their wedding was small, filled with laughter, gospel music, and family who mattered. Nana cried openly, blessing their union with words that carried generations of strength. Not long after, Amara gave birth to a daughter, and when Malik held the tiny child against his chest, the man who had once confessed he was lost finally looked found. Together they built a life not of power or headlines, but of choice, honesty, and love. The world outside still judged, whispered, and speculated, but none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the promise they had made on the steps of the church, a promise that held steady through storms. To walk side by side, equal always, careful but never small, strong enough to build a forever.